Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to Love Crib, your ultimate destination for all things romance, connection, and heartfelt stories. I'm thrilled to have you here, sharing this amazing journey of exploring love in all its beautiful, complex, and magical forms. Whether you're a hopeless romantic, someone searching for relationship insights, or just love diving into heartwarming content, you're exactly where you need to be. If you're enjoying what you see, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could hit that subscribe button to stay connected with our Love Crib community. Drop a like to show some love, support, and motivation. Share this video with someone who might need a little romance in their life. Your support means the world to me and helps us continue creating content that celebrates love, connection, and the beautiful stories that bring us together. The chandeliers of the Manhattan Grand Ballroom cast a golden glow over the annual Visionary Foundation Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the year. Alexander Steele adjusted his custom Armani tie as he surveyed the room from a privileged corner. At 42, he commanded attention without effort. His salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his posture emanating the confidence of a man who controlled one of the largest real estate development firms in the country. The Steele Corporation's latest skyscraper had just transformed the New York skyline, adding another achievement to Alexander's impressive portfolio. Forbes had recently featured him on their cover, dubbing him the Emperor of Steel and Glass. His net worth had tripled since his divorce 5 years ago, as though success was his revenge against personal failure. Yet despite the wealth, the power, the endless stream of willing companions, Alexander felt the hollowness that had become his constant companion. His penthouse overlooking Central Park felt cavernous when he returned each night. His executive assistant managed his social calendar with military precision, but no amount of galas, benefits, or business dinners could fill the void Isabella had left. "Mr. Steele, they're about to introduce the keynote speaker," his assistant, Margot, whispered, appearing at his elbow with practiced discretion. Alexander nodded, taking another sip of his scotch. He wasn't particularly interested in tonight's speaker, some rising star in sustainable design who was revolutionizing eco-friendly spaces. His attendance was merely obligatory. The Steele Foundation was a major donor. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, her voice silencing the elegant murmur of the crowd, "it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this evening." Her innovative approach to sustainable design has not only won her the Pritzker Environmental Award, but has redefined how we think about living spaces that harmonize with our planet. Please welcome the founder and creative director of Monroe Design Studio, Isabella Monroe. Alexander's glass froze halfway to his lips. The scotch suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. Isabella. He hadn't seen her in person since the divorce was finalized 5 years ago. He'd purposely avoided events where she might appear, had his team run background checks on potential business partners to ensure no connection to her. And yet here she was, walking confidently to the podium in a sleek emerald dress that caught the light with each graceful step. She looked different, more confident, more radiant. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, falling in soft waves just past her shoulders. The timid smile he remembered had transformed into something luminous and self-assured. "Thank you for that warm introduction," Isabella began, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. 5 years ago, I founded Monroe Design Studio with a simple mission: to create spaces that nurture both the environment and the human spirit. 5 years ago, right after their divorce was finalized, Alexander felt a strange tightness in his chest as memories flooded back. Isabella sketching designs at their kitchen island while he worked late into the night, her passionate explanations of sustainable materials that he'd half listened to while checking emails, her gradual withdrawal as his empire expanded and their marriage contracted. As Isabella spoke about her journey from a small-town dreamer to an award-winning designer, Alexander found himself transfixed. She'd accomplished so much without him, without his connections or his wealth. The fierce pride he felt was immediately followed by a crushing realization. He had underestimated her. He had taken her for granted, assumed she needed him more than he needed her. "Our latest project," Isabella continued, pulling up slides of a breathtaking community center built from reclaimed materials, proves that sustainability and luxury aren't mutually exclusive. Beauty doesn't have to come at the earth's expense. The audience broke into appreciative applause. Alexander found himself clapping harder than anyone, earning curious glances from those nearby. Margot raised an eyebrow at him, but he ignored her. When Isabella concluded her speech to a standing ovation, Alexander felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in years. His heart was racing, his palms slightly damp. It was a feeling of opportunity and fear intertwined, the precipice of decision that could change everything. "Margot," he said, his eyes never leaving Isabella as she accepted congratulations from admirers, "find out if Miss Monroe will be attending the reception afterward." "Of course, Mr. Steele," Margot replied, already tapping on her tablet. "Though I should remind you that you have an early meeting tomorrow with the Japanese investors." "Cancel it," Alexander said, surprising even himself. "Reschedule for next week." Margot stared at him, momentarily speechless. In 5 years, Alexander Steele had never canceled a meeting for personal reasons. Across the room, Isabella laughed at something someone said to her, the sound carrying to him like a forgotten melody. And in that moment, with startling clarity, Alexander knew he had made the biggest mistake of his life letting her go, and somehow, against all odds, he would find a way to win her back. The post-gala reception buzzed with New York's elite, but Alexander had eyes only for Isabella. She stood across the room, engaged in animated conversation with the mayor and his wife. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, a habit Alexander once found endearing in their private moments, now captivating a rapt audience. He waited, watching her from a distance, memories washing over him like waves. Their whirlwind romance, the intimate wedding on his private island, the passionate early years when they couldn't bear to be apart, and then the slow unraveling. His increasingly demanding schedule, the missed anniversaries, the lonely dinner she had alone while he closed deals across the world. "You're staring," came a familiar voice. Alexander turned to find his closest friend and CFO, Marcus Chun, regarding him with amusement. "I should have known she'd be here. Is this going to be a problem?" "She looks happy," Alexander said, ignoring the question. "She is happy," Marcus confirmed, sipping his champagne. "Monroe Design Studio is doing remarkably well. They just secured the contract for the new Lincoln Center renovation. Completely eco-friendly redesign." Alexander felt a twinge of both pride and regret. "You've kept tabs on her." Marcus shrugged. "Someone had to. You were too busy pretending she didn't exist." He gave Alexander a knowing look. "Don't do this to yourself, Alex." Or to her. The divorce was hard enough on both of you. But Alexander had already made up his mind. He straightened his jacket and made his way across the room, his heart pounding with each step. The crowd seemed to part before him. The benefit of being Alexander Steele. Isabella sensed his presence before she saw him. Her posture stiffened slightly, though her smile remained fixed as she turned to face him. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying surprise. "It's been a long time." 5 years, 2 months, and 16 days, he replied, then immediately regretted the precision that revealed how acutely he'd felt her absence. "Your speech was remarkable. Congratulations on all your success." Something flashed in her eyes. Wariness, perhaps. "Thank you. Your new tower is quite impressive as well. I saw the feature in Architectural Digest." The mayor and his wife exchanged glances before tactfully excusing themselves, leaving Alexander and Isabella in a bubble of tense privacy despite the crowded room. "How have you been, Izzy?" The familiar nickname slipped out before he could stop himself. "It's Isabella now," she corrected him gently but firmly. "And I've been well, very well, actually." The subtle rebuke stung more than he expected. "Of course, Isabella." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and untouchable memories. "Your company focuses on sustainable designs," Alexander finally said. "I've been considering implementing more eco-friendly elements in our new developments. Perhaps we could discuss a potential collaboration." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "A collaboration? Between Monroe Design and Steele Corporation?" "Why not? Your expertise in sustainability, combined with our resources and reach, we could create something truly groundbreaking." She studied him for a long moment. Is this about business, Alexander? Because if it is, you can have your assistant contact my office. Before he could respond, a tall, distinguished man with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair approached, placing a protective hand on Isabella's lower back. "Sorry I'm late, darling," the man said, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "The hospital called with an emergency." He turned to Alexander with a polite smile. "Dr. James Thornton." He introduced himself, extending his hand. "And you must be the famous Alexander Steele. Isabella has mentioned you." Alexander felt a surge of irrational jealousy as he shook the man's hand with more force than necessary. "All good things, I hope." James smiled and wavered. "Isabella is far too gracious for anything else." "James is the head of pediatric surgery at Mount Sinai," Isabella explained, a warmth in her voice when she spoke of him that cut Alexander to the core. "And my date for the evening." Alexander forced a smile. "How fortunate for both of you." Isabella's phone chimed with a message. She glanced at it and frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, but we should get going. Early consultation tomorrow." She looked up at Alexander, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "It was unexpected seeing you, Alexander." "Likewise," he managed, "but I meant what I said about the collaboration." "Think about it." Something unreadable crossed her face. "I will. Good night, Alexander." He watched her walk away, Dr. James Thornton's hand still resting on her back, guiding her through the crowd with the easy intimacy of an established relationship. Marcus appeared at his side, handing him a fresh scotch. "That went well," he observed dryly. Alexander took the drink and downed it in one swallow. "She's seeing someone. Dr. Thornton. They've been together for almost a year now. He's well-respected, charitable, and by all accounts, utterly devoted to her." Marcus gave him a sympathetic look. "What did you expect, Alex? That she'd be waiting for you?" The truth was, Alexander hadn't allowed himself to consider Isabella's life without him. In the carefully constructed narrative of his mind, she existed in suspension, unchanged by time or circumstance, ready to be reclaimed when he finally realized what he'd lost. Reality was proving far more complicated. "I want a full profile on James Thornton by morning," Alexander said, his voice hardening into the tone he used for business matters. "And I want to know everything about Monroe Design's current projects, financial status, and future plans." Marcus sighed. "Alex." "She's still wearing it," Alexander interrupted, his eyes distant. "Wearing what?" "The bracelet I gave her on our first anniversary. Platinum with sapphires." He turned to Marcus, newfound determination in his eyes. "She wouldn't still wear it if everything was completely resolved between us." "Or maybe she just likes the bracelet," Marcus countered. "Don't read too much into it." But Alexander wasn't listening. His mind was already racing ahead, forming strategies and contingencies like he did with any business acquisition. Because that's what this was to him in this moment. A campaign to reacquire what he had foolishly discarded. "I'm going to get her back," he said with the absolute certainty that had built his empire. Marcus looked at his friend with genuine concern. "And what about what she wants?" Alexander turned to him, his expression softening with a vulnerability few ever witnessed. "What if what she really wants is me, but she's afraid to admit it? What if we both made mistakes? Don't I at least owe it to both of us to find out?" Marcus had no answer for that. He knew the stubborn set of Alexander's jaw too well. The same expression he wore before acquiring a seemingly impossible property or outmaneuvering a competitor. Alexander Steele didn't give up when he wanted something. And he had never wanted anything as badly as he wanted Isabella Monroe back in his life. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring out at the glittering city below, memories washing over him in waves. "You promised you'd be home for dinner," Isabella said, her voice tight with disappointment as Alexander gathered documents from his home office. "I know, and I'm sorry, but the Singapore deal is falling apart. If I don't handle this now, we could lose millions." "It's always millions, Alex. It's always some crisis that only you can solve." She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, still wearing the dress she put on for their anniversary dinner. "Do you even remember what today is?" He paused, guilt flashing across his face. Of course I do. 5 years. I got you something. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper. Her expression softened slightly as she unwrapped it to reveal a platinum bracelet studded with sapphires that matched her eyes. It's beautiful, she admitted. Like you, he said, clasping around her wrist before kissing her. I'll make this up to you. I promise. That's what you always say. She stepped back, the momentary warmth fading. But I'm starting to think you don't know how. The memory faded, replaced by another. I can't do this anymore, Alex. Isabella stood in their bedroom, suitcases packed beside her. I can't keep competing with your empire for scraps of your attention. I can't keep being the only one fighting for our marriage. You're overreacting, he insisted, panic rising in his chest. We're just going through a rough patch. Every couple does. A rough patch? We've been living separate lives for years. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm building something important. Something that will set us up for life. Why can't you understand that? Because it's already cost us our life together. Her voice broke. I wanted a partner, Alex, not a provider, not a part-time husband who treats me like a prize he won and then left on a shelf to collect dust. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me honestly, if I asked you right now to walk away from Steele Corporation, to start over somewhere quiet with just me, would you do it? His hesitation was answer enough. That's what I thought, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't even think you know who you are without that company anymore. Alexander closed his eyes against the pain of the memory. She had been right. He hadn't known who he was without his empire, without the constant validation of success and acquisition. But losing her had forced him to face the emptiness of achievement, without someone to share it with. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had finally become the man she needed him to be only after losing her. His phone buzzed with an incoming email. Marcus had sent the information he requested on both Dr. Thornton and Monroe Design. Alexander opened the files, determined to find a way back into Isabella's life, a chance to show her he'd changed. The next morning, he made a decision. If Isabella wouldn't agree to a collaboration based on their past, he would give her a reason she couldn't refuse professionally. He called Margot. Contact the Visionary Foundation. I want to fund a major project, an eco-friendly community center in that underserved neighborhood in Brooklyn we've been looking at. And I want to announce that Monroe Design Studio will be leading the design. Sir, Margot questioned, shouldn't we consult with Mrs. Monroe first? We will, Alexander replied. But I need to create an opportunity she can't turn down, one that aligns perfectly with her values. It was manipulative, perhaps, but Alexander was playing for higher stakes than he ever had before. And this time, failure wasn't an option. Isabella stared at the email on her computer screen, reading it for the third time in disbelief. The Visionary Foundation was offering Monroe Design Studio the lead on an ambitious community center project in Brooklyn, a $50 million eco-friendly complex that would provide educational resources, healthcare facilities, and green spaces for an underserved community. It was exactly the kind of project she had dreamed of since founding her company. The kind that could cement her studio's reputation as a leader in sustainable, community-focused design. And Alexander Steele was a primary donor. This has manipulation written all over it, said Maya, Isabella's business partner and best friend since design school. She peered over Isabella's shoulder at the email. Convenient timing, don't you think? You see him for first time in 5 years, and suddenly he's funding your dream project. Isabella sighed, leaning back in her chair. It's a legitimate offer from the foundation, not directly from Alexander. Oh, please. Maya rolled her eyes. The man sits on their board and just donated $30 million. They're not going to say no to his suggestion about who should design it. She perched on the edge of Isabella's desk. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Isabella could answer, her phone rang, an unlisted number. With a sense of foreboding, she answered, Isabella Monroe. Isabella, Alexander's voice was warm and deep, stirring memories she'd spent years trying to bury. I hope I'm not interrupting. Alexander, she acknowledged, signaling to Maya, who made exaggerated gagging motions before retreating to her own office. What a coincidence. I was just reading about the Visionary Foundation's new community center project. No coincidence, he admitted readily. I recommended your studio based on your keynote speech. The foundation needs a design team that understands both sustainability and community impact. Isabella closed her eyes, gathering her composure. And your sudden interest in sustainable community centers has nothing to do with seeing me at the gala? I won't insult your intelligence by denying that seeing you influenced my thinking, Alexander replied with surprising candor. But the project itself has merit. The neighborhood needs a center, and your studio is the best choice to design it. She couldn't argue with that logic, which was infuriating. Why are you doing this, Alexander? A pause. Because I think we work well together, professionally speaking. We were never professional together, she pointed out. We were married. Then consider this a chance to establish a different kind of relationship. His voice softened. Look, the foundation is hosting a site visit tomorrow afternoon. Come see the location, hear the community's needs. If you're not interested after that, I'll respect your decision and recommend another firm. Isabella should have said no. Every instinct for self-preservation urged her to decline, but the project itself was too important, too aligned with her company's mission to dismiss outright. Fine, she conceded. The site visit only. I'm making no commitments. That's all I ask, Alexander said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I'll text you the details. And Isabella, thank you for considering it. After hanging up, Isabella pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling a headache forming. Maya appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. You're going, aren't you? It's just a site visit, Isabella defended. Maya raised an eyebrow. And James is okay with you working with your ex-husband? Isabella hesitated. She hadn't mentioned the encounter with Alexander to James yet. It's a professional opportunity, not a personal reunion. Honey, Maya said gently, when it comes to Alexander Steele, it's always personal with you. The next afternoon, Isabella arrived at the proposed site in Brooklyn, a neglected community space surrounded by aging apartment buildings. She purposely arrived 15 minutes early to gather her thoughts and take in location without Alexander's influence. The potential was obvious, a large lot with mature trees, accessible from multiple streets, within walking distance of schools and public transportation. The community clearly needed a resource center. Children played in a dilapidated playground, while elderly residents watched from benches in need of repair. It has good bones, doesn't it? Isabella turned to find Alexander approaching, dressed more casually than the gala in dark jeans and a light gray sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like the man she'd fallen in love with years ago. The location is potential, she acknowledged professionally, but I'm concerned about displacement. New developments often lead to gentrification. Alexander nodded. That's why the foundation purchased not just this lot, but the surrounding apartment buildings as well. Rent control guarantees no residents will be priced out. In fact, part of the project includes renovating those buildings with energy-efficient systems to lower utility costs for residents. Isabella was impressed despite herself. You've thought this through. I've been trying to see projects through a different lens these past few years, he admitted, looking beyond profit margins to consider community impact. Before she could respond, a group approached, foundation representatives, community leaders, and a local councilwoman. For the next hour, Isabella listened to their hopes of the center, taking notes and asking questions about specific needs and challenges. Alexander remained mostly silent, allowing her to lead the discussions, though she caught him watching her with undisguised admiration as she connected with the residents. His attention was both flattering and unsettling. As the official visit concluded and the others departed, Alexander turned to her. Would you have time for coffee? There's a local place around the corner the residents recommended. Owner makes everything from scratch. Isabella hesitated. Alexander, Purely professional, he promised, raising his hands in surrender. I have some additional information about the project parameters and timeline that might help you decide. Against her better judgment, Isabella agreed. The cafe was a charming, family-owned establishment with mismatched furniture and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. They settled at a corner table, where Alexander surprised her by ordering her exact preference, an oat milk latte with an extra shot. "You remember," she observed. "I remember everything about you, Isabella," he said simply. The straightforward admission caught her off guard. There was none of the calculated charm she'd expected, just honest vulnerability. "The project deadline seems tight," she said, steering the conversation back to safer ground as she reviewed the documents he provided. "It is," he acknowledged, "but the foundation secured expedited permits, and I've already lined up contractors who can begin once designs are approved." Isabella looked up from papers. "Why me, Alexander? Really, there are dozens of sustainable design firms you could have chosen." Alexander set down his coffee cup, meeting her gaze directly. "Because you're the best. Because your vision aligns perfectly with what this community needs. And yes, because I've missed you, and I'm not above creating an opportunity to work with you again." His honesty was disarming. The Alexander she had known would have maintained the pretense of pure professional interest, never admitting to personal motives. "I'm seeing someone," she reminded him. "Someone I care about deeply." "I know," Alexander nodded. "Dr. Thornton seems like a good man." "He is," Isabella confirmed. "He's kind and attentive and present in a way you never were." Alexander winced but didn't deny it. "I deserve that. And more." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to leave him, Isabella. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I've changed. Through this project, through professional collaboration. If friendship is all that comes of it, I'll consider myself fortunate." Isabella studied him, searching for signs of the manipulative tactics he'd often employed in business. But all she saw was sincerity and perhaps a hint of the same longing she occasionally felt in quiet moments. "My team would need creative control," she said finally. Alexander's expression brightened. "Absolutely. And this stays strictly professional." "Of course." "I mean it, Alexander. No grand gestures, no surprise gifts, no attempts to undermine my relationship with James." He held up his hands in surrender. "I promise. Professional boundaries will be maintained at all times." Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that had always been her weakness. "Does that mean you'll take the project?" Against all logic and self-preservation instincts, Isabella nodded. "Monroe Design Studio will submit a proposal based on today's site visit and the community's input." Alexander beamed, but restrained himself from reaching for her hand as he might have once done. "Thank you. You won't regret it." As Isabella watched him signal for the check, she wasn't so sure about that. Working with Alexander meant reopening doors she had firmly closed years ago. But the project itself called to her, a chance to create something lasting and meaningful for a community in need. She would simply have to guard her heart more carefully this time. Over the next several weeks, Isabella found herself working closely with Alexander and the foundation team. To her surprise, Alexander kept his promise about maintaining professional boundaries. He was respectful, contributed valuable insights, and deferred to her expertise on design matters. The only hint of their shared paths came in the form of his complete attention when she spoke, the kind of focused listening she had always craved during their marriage. One evening, as they reviewed preliminary designs in the conference room of Monroe Design Studio, Isabella realized it was past 9 o'clock. The foundation representatives had left hours ago, but she and Alexander had continued refining the community gardens portion of the project, losing track of time. "We should probably call it a night," she suggested, stretching her cramped shoulders. Alexander glanced at his watch in surprise. "I had no idea it was so late. I kept you too long." "It was mutual," she assured him, gathering her sketches. The rooftop garden concept needed work. He smiled. "And now it's brilliant. Your idea to incorporate the traditional planting methods from a neighborhood's diverse cultural backgrounds is inspired." Isabella felt a familiar warmth at his praise. Alexander had always understood the passion behind her work, even when he'd been too busy to fully support it. As they packed up their materials, Alexander hesitated. "I'm giving a talk at Columbia tomorrow, a guest lecture on ethical development in urban environments. It's nothing formal, but if you're interested—" "I have client meetings all day," she said, perhaps too quickly. He nodded, accepting the boundary. "Of course. Another time, perhaps." As they walked to the elevator, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. The professional dynamic had been working, but moments like this, just the two of them, late at night, with work included, blurred the careful lines they'd drawn. "Isabella," Alexander said softly as the elevator arrived, "I just want to say that working with you these past weeks has been the highlight of my year. Your vision for this project is extraordinary." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, she glimpsed a man she had fallen in love with, passionate, appreciative, fully present in the moment. "Thank you," she managed. "It's been surprisingly pleasant working with you, too." A smile tugged at his lips. High praise indeed. As they rode down in silence, Isabella found herself studying his profile. He looked tired but content, the driven intensity that had characterized their marriage now tempered with something that looked like peace. "How did that happen?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, puzzled. "How did what happen?" "You seem different." "More." She searched for the right word. "Balanced." Alexander considered her observation as the elevator reached the ground floor. "About 2 years after our divorce, I had a health scare," he admitted as they walked to the deserted lobby. "Nothing serious in the end, but enough to make me reevaluate things. I realized I'd built an empire at the cost of everything else that mattered." Isabella stopped at the building entrance, surprised by this revelation. "You never mention a health issue." "Why would I?" he asked gently. "We weren't in contact, and I didn't want you to feel obligated in any way." The thoughtfulness of that decision, so unlike the Alexander who had demanded her attention on his terms, struck her deeply. "Anyway," he continued, "I started making changes, delegating more, mentoring my executives instead of micromanaging them, taking actual vacations." He smiled ruefully. "I even tried meditation, though I'm terrible at it." Isabella laughed despite herself, imagining Alexander attempting to sit still and clear his mind. "I'd pay to see that." "I'm sure the instructor would be happy to share horror stories for the right price," he joked, then grew serious again. "The point is, I learned too late that success means nothing without balance and connection." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and regret. "I should go," Isabella said softly. "James is probably waiting up." Alexander nodded, taking a step back. "Of course. I'll have my driver take you home." "That's not necessary." "Please," he insisted. "It's late, and it would make me feel better." She acquiesced, allowing him to walk her to the sleek black car waiting at the curb. As the driver opened the door for her, Alexander surprised her by pulling a small package from his pocket. "Before you object," he said quickly, "this isn't a personal gift. It's reference material for the project." Curious, Isabella unwrapped the package to find a vintage book on indigenous gardening practices. She opened the cover to discover it was a rare first edition. "Alexander," she breathed, running her fingers over the delicate illustrations. "This must have cost." "It's relevant to the rooftop garden design," he interrupted. "The traditional planting methods you wanted to incorporate. I came across it at that bookshop we used to visit in the village." The fact that he remembered her favorite bookshop after all these years touched her unexpectedly. "Thank you. This will be incredibly helpful." Their fingers brushed as she took the book, sending an unwelcome jolt of awareness through her. For a moment, neither moved, caught in the magnetic pull of shared history and unresolved feelings. Alexander broke the spell first, stepping back. "Good night, Isabella. I'll see you at the community presentation next week." "Good night," she echoed, sliding into the car. As the driver pulled away, Isabella clutched the book to her chest, troubled by the conflicting emotions Alexander's thoughtfulness had stirred. The book was technically a professional resource, yet the care behind it, finding something so perfectly aligned with her interests, remembering their shared history with the bookshop, felt intensely personal. What disturbed her most was how much she had enjoyed working with him these past weeks. His insights were valuable, his commitment to the community genuine, and his respect for her expertise unwavering. This new Alexander was everything she had once hoped her husband would become. But that realization came 5 years too late. She had built a new life, found love with a man who had been consistently present and supportive from the beginning. James deserved her full commitment, not a heart divided by resurfacing feelings for her ex-husband. Isabella texted James as she was on her way home, determined to focus on the present rather than a past that couldn't be changed. Yet as the city lights blurred outside the window, she couldn't help wondering what might have been if Alexander had found this balance while they were still together, and what it meant that he seemed to have found it now. The morning of the community presentation dawned bright and clear. Isabella arrived early at the site, where a large tent had been erected for the event. Local residents, media, foundation representatives, and city officials would soon gather to see Monroe Design Studios' vision for their new community center. Isabella supervised her team as they arranged display boards and prepared the digital presentation. Everything was perfect, except for the nervous flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with public speaking and everything to do with seeing Alexander again. Their last encounter left her unsettled, questioning feelings she thought long resolved. She had mentioned the project to James, but minimized Alexander's involvement, telling herself it was to avoid unnecessary complications. The rationalization felt hollow even to her. "You look amazing," Maya said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. The power suit was the right choice. Isabella smoothed her navy blazer. "Thanks. Is everything ready?" "All set. The model's in place, slides are loaded, and the 3D walkthrough is good to go." Maya handed her a coffee. "So, is Billionaire Boy making an appearance?" "Alexander will be here with the foundation board," Isabella confirmed, deliberately casual. "And please don't call him that." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Defending him now? Interesting development." "I'm not defending him. It's just unprofessional." Maya hummed skeptically. "And how's James feeling about your ongoing collaboration with the ex?" Isabella sipped her coffee to avoid answering immediately. "He understands it's a professional relationship. He trusts me." "As he should," Maya agreed. "But trust doesn't mean he's comfortable with the situation. Men like Steele have a way of disrupting perfectly good relationships." Before Isabella could respond, her phone chimed with a news alert. She glanced at it absently, then froze. The headline made her blood run cold. "Steele Corporation under investigation for bribery in overseas development deal." She clicked on the article, quickly scanning its contents. According to anonymous sources, Steele Corporation executives had allegedly paid government officials in developing countries to bypass environmental regulations for several international projects. The investigation had been ongoing for months. "What is it?" Maya asked, noting her expression. Wordlessly, Isabella handed her the phone. Maya's eyes widened as she read. "Holy shit," she breathed. "This could take down his whole company." Isabella felt sick. The allegations directly contradicted everything Alexander had claimed about his changed approach to business. Worse, they undermined the very principles of the Community Center project. "The timing couldn't be worse," Maya continued. "The press is already here for our presentation. They'll have a field day connecting the scandal to our project." Isabella's mind raced. The Community Center was funded by the Visionary Foundation, not directly by Steele Corporation, but Alexander was the primary donor and publicly associated with the initiative. The negative publicity could jeopardize the entire project, or force Monroe Design Studio to withdraw to protect their reputation. "What do we do?" Maya asked, watching people begin to arrive for the presentation. "If these allegations are true, we can't be associated with them." Isabella took a deep breath, gathering her composure. "We don't know anything for certain yet. Let's proceed with the presentation as planned. This is about the community, not Alexander." As if summoned by her words, Alexander himself appeared at the entrance of the tent. Unlike his usual confident stride, his movements were tense, his expression grim. When he spotted Isabella, he made his way directly to her. "You've seen the news," he said without preamble, his voice low. "Is it true?" Isabella asked, searching his face for answers. "No," he replied firmly. "At least, not the way they're reporting it. Some executives in our international division were operating without proper oversight. I've been cooperating with the investigation for months, but someone leaked it to the press before we could address it publicly." Maya stepped away discreetly, leaving them to speak privately. "You didn't tell me," Isabella said, hurt despite herself. "I couldn't. The investigation was confidential." Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Isabella, I swear to you, I had no knowledge of these bribes. The moment I discovered the irregularities, I launched an internal investigation and contacted the authorities myself." She wanted to believe him. The sincerity in his eyes, the transparent distress in his expression, all suggested he was telling the truth. But she had believed in him before, only to be disappointed. "What does this mean for project?" she asked, focusing on what mattered most immediately. "The foundation is standing firm for now," Alexander assured her. "I've offered to step back if necessary, but they're waiting for more information before making any decisions." The tent was filling with guests. Reporters huddled in small groups, occasionally glancing their way with predatory interest. "We should separate," Isabella decided. "Your presence next to me during presentation will only fuel speculation and detract from the project itself." Though hurt flashed in his eyes, Alexander nodded. "You're right. This is about the community center, not me or my company." He gestured to where foundation board members were gathering. "I'll stay with the board and let you take the lead entirely." As he turned to leave, Isabella caught his arm. "Alexander, if what you're saying is true, if you truly had no knowledge of this—" "I didn't," he interjected fiercely. "Isabella, everything I've told you about changing my priorities, about wanting to do business differently, that was real. I would never jeopardize this project or your reputation. Not for anything." The conviction in his voice stirred something in her, a dormant trust she had buried years ago. "I believe you," she said softly, surprising herself at the truth of it. Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As Alexander walked away, Isabella steeled herself for the presentation ahead. Whatever personal complications existed between them would have to wait. For now, her focus needed to be on delivering her vision for the community center. The presentation began smoothly. Isabella welcomed everyone, introduced her team, and outlined Monroe Design Studio's approach to the project. As she walked the audience through their designs, highlighting the sustainable features and community-focused spaces, she felt her confidence returning. This was her element, translating dreams into tangible spaces where people could thrive. Then came the questions. While most concerned the design itself, eventually a reporter from the New York Times stood. "Ms. Monroe, given the breaking news about Steele Corporation's alleged environmental violations overseas, how do you reconcile working on an eco-friendly project funded primarily by Alexander Steele?" A hush fell over the crowd. Isabella saw Alexander tense, but remained silent, honoring his promise to let her handle the presentation. "This project is funded by the Visionary Foundation, which has a stellar record of community development," Isabella answered carefully. "While Mr. Steele is a donor, the foundation maintains independent oversight of all its initiatives." "But as Mr. Steele's ex-wife," the reporter pressed, "doesn't your involvement create a conflict of interest, especially now that his company faces serious ethical allegations?" The personal angle caught Isabella off guard. She hadn't expected their past relationship to be weaponized so bluntly. "My personal history is irrelevant to my professional capabilities," she replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Monroe Design Studio was selected based on our expertise in sustainable design and community engagement. Sources suggest your firm was specifically requested by Mr. Steele," another reporter called out. "Is this project simply a way for him to rehabilitate his image through association with his ex-wife's eco-friendly reputation?" Isabella felt anger rising. These insinuations threatened not just the project, but her professional credibility. Everything she had built since the divorce. Before she could respond, Alexander rose from his seat, moving to stand beside her at the podium. "I'd like to address these questions," he said calmly, his presence beside her both supportive and unsettling. Isabella gave him a slight nod, allowing him to take the microphone. "First, let me be clear. The allegations against certain executives at Steele Corporation are being thoroughly investigated with my full cooperation," Alexander stated firmly. "I personally alerted authorities when irregularities were discovered, because ethical business practices are non-negotiable." He paused, surveying the room with a commanding presence that had built his empire. "Second, yes, I recommended Monroe Design Studio for this project because they are the best in the field of sustainable design. Ms. Monroe's personal integrity and professional excellence are beyond question, which is precisely why she shouldn't be tainted by association with any controversy surrounding my company." Alexander turned slightly toward Isabella, his expression softening. "To that end, I am announcing today that I am recusing myself from all oversight of this project. My financial contribution will remain, but decisions about the community center will rest solely with the foundation board and the design team led by Ms. Monroe." Murmurs spread through the audience. Isabella stared at Alexander in surprise. He was publicly stepping back, sacrificing his visible role in a project he genuinely cared about to protect her reputation. "Furthermore," Alexander continued, "to ensure complete transparency, Steele Corporation will fund an independent environmental review of all our current projects worldwide, with results to be made public regardless of findings." The bold move silenced even the most aggressive reporters. It was a masterstroke of crisis management, but Isabella sensed it was more than that. The look in Alexander's eyes when he glanced at her conveyed his true motivation, protecting her above protecting himself. Ms. Monroe and her team have created an extraordinary design that will transform this community, Alexander concluded. Their vision deserves your full attention, not distractions about corporate investigations that have nothing to do with this project. I encourage you to focus on what matters, the exceptional work Monroe Design Studio has presented today. With that, he handed the microphone back to Isabella and returned to his seat, leaving her to conclude the presentation. The remaining questions focused primarily on design elements and timeline, the scandal temporarily overshadowed by Alexander's decisive action. When the formal presentation ended, Isabella was immediately surrounded by community members expressing enthusiasm for the design. From across the room, she caught glimpses of Alexander speaking earnestly with Foundation board members, presumably formalizing his recusal from the project. It was nearly an hour before a crowd thinned enough for her to slip away, needing a moment of quiet to process what had happened. She found refuge behind a tent, in a small garden area that would eventually become part of the community center grounds. "There you are." She turned to find Alexander approaching, his tie loosened and his expression weary, but relieved. "That was quite a gesture," Isabella said quietly, stepping back from the project. Alexander shrugged. "It was the right thing to do. The project matters more than my involvement in it. Still, I know how much this meant to you." "Not as much as your reputation means to me," he replied simply. The honesty in his voice made her heart constrict. "Alexander, I meant what I said in there," he interrupted. "Every word. I've been trying to build a company that operates with integrity, and I failed to provide adequate oversight in our international division. That's on me, but I won't let it touch you or this project." Isabella studied him. The man who had once prioritized business above all else now willingly stepping into the shadows to protect something greater than himself. "What will happen with the investigation?" she asked. "Best case? The executives responsible will face consequences, and the company will pay fines and implement stronger compliance measures." He ran a hand through his hair. "Worst case? The scandal grows, stock prices plummet, and I face pressure to step down as CEO." The potential severity of the situation struck her. "You could lose everything you've built." A sad smile touched his lips. "I lost what mattered most 5 years ago, Isabella. The company is just things and money. Important, but not irreplaceable." The raw vulnerability in his admission left her speechless. This was a side of Alexander she had glimpsed only rarely during their marriage, usually late at night when the fences were down, or in rare moments of reflection after visiting his humble childhood home. Before she could respond, Her phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen. "You should take that," Alexander said, nodding toward her phone. "And I should go deal with my board of directors. They're probably in collective cardiac arrest by now." He turned to leave, then paused. "Thank you for believing in me today. Whatever happens next with the investigation, knowing you still have some faith in me, it means everything." As he walked away, Isabella answered the call, James's concerned voice immediately filling her ear. "Izzy, I just saw the news. Are you okay? I tried texting earlier, but figured you were in the presentation." "I'm fine," she assured him, watching Alexander's retreating figure. "It was tense, but we got through it." "I'm coming to pick you up," James insisted. "You shouldn't have to face reporters alone." His protective instinct was touching, yet Isabella felt a flicker of resistance. "That's not necessary. The presentation went well despite everything, and most of the press has left." "It's not just about the press," James continued. "I saw how they're trying to drag your history with Steele into this. It's completely unprofessional." "Alexander actually defended me," Isabella found herself saying. "He publicly recused himself from the project to protect my reputation." A pause. "That was decent of him. Still, I'd feel better if I was there with you. This whole situation with you working alongside your ex-husband has been difficult enough without adding a corporate scandal." Something in his tone gave her pause. "James, we discussed this. It's a professional collaboration on an important project. A collaboration he engineered specifically to get close to you again," James pointed out. "You can't tell me you don't see that." The truth of the observation stung, partially because Isabella had come to the same conclusion herself. Yet something had changed. Alexander's actions today had demonstrated a selflessness she hadn't believed him capable of. "It's complicated," she admitted, "but I'm handling it. I'll call you when I'm done here, okay?" James sighed. "All right, but Izzy, just be careful. Men like Steele are used to getting what they want one way or another." After ending the call, Isabella remained in the garden, conflicted emotions washing over her. James's concerns were valid. Alexander had deliberately created this collaboration to reconnect with her. Yet today, when faced with a choice between his own interests and hers, he had chosen to protect her without hesitation. The man she had divorced would never have made that choice. As the sun began to set over the Brooklyn skyline, casting long shadows across what would become a community gathering place, Isabella faced an uncomfortable truth. The feelings she had tried to bury for Alexander were resurfacing, complicated by the changed man he seemed to have become, and she had no idea what to do about it. 2 weeks after presentation, the Steele Corporation scandal dominated business news. As Alexander had predicted, several executives faced criminal charges for the overseas bribes. While investigators had cleared Alexander himself of direct involvement, the company's stock had plummeted, and shareholders were calling for leadership changes. Through it all, the community center project continued to move forward, with the foundation standing firmly behind Monroe Design Studios' vision. Alexander, true to his word, had stepped back from public association with the initiative, though Isabella knew he continued to receive updates through foundation channels. She hadn't seen him since the day of the presentation, a deliberate distance she had maintained while sorting through her conflicted feelings. James had been supportive but watchful, clearly relieved that Alexander was no longer directly involved in the project. On a rainy Thursday evening, Isabella worked late at her studio, finalizing construction documents for the community center. The rest of her team had gone home hours ago, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. A knock at the door startled her. Looking up, she was surprised to see Alexander standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. "I should have called first," he said apologetically. "The security guard remembered me from before and let me up." Isabella set down her pencil. "It's fine. Is everything okay?" "Not exactly." Alexander entered hesitantly, as if uncertain of his welcome. "The board of directors asked for my resignation today." "Oh, Alexander." The news stunned her. Despite the scandal, she hadn't believed they would actually force him out of his own company. "What did you say?" "I agreed to step down temporarily while restructuring takes place. He removed his wet coat, draping it over a chair. It's the right decision for the company's stability. Isabella studied him, expecting to see devastation. Instead, he appeared almost peaceful, like someone who had set down a heavy burden. "You don't seem as upset as I would have expected," she observed. A faint smile touched his lips. "I thought I would be. The company has been my identity for so long." He moved to the window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. "But these past weeks have clarified things, made me realize what truly matters." "And what's that?" she asked softly. He turned to face her. "Integrity, making amends, building something meaningful rather than just profitable." He paused. "And you, Isabella, always you." The directness of his answer caught her off guard. "Alexander—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "You're with James. He's a good man who hasn't made the mistakes I have. I'm not here to disrupt that." He took a deep breath. "I actually came to tell you I'm leaving New York for a while. I've been invited to join a sustainable development initiative in Costa Rica. They need someone with business experience to help structure their operations." Isabella blinked in surprise. "Costa Rica? That's unexpected." "It is, isn't it?" He smiled ruefully. "The irony isn't lost on me. 5 years ago, you asked if I would walk away from everything to start over somewhere quiet with just you. I hesitated, and it cost me everything that mattered. Now I'm doing it alone." The memory of that painful conversation during their separation washed over her. "I never actually expected you to give up the company," she admitted. "I just wanted to know that I mattered more." "You did," he said quietly. "I was too blind to see it until it was too late." Isabella felt tears threatening and turned away, pretending to organize papers on her desk. "When do you leave?" "Next week. The foundation board is fully briefed on the transition. The community center funding is secure in an independent trust, so nothing about my departure will affect the project." She nodded, absorbing the information while trying to ignore the hollow feeling spreading in her chest. Alexander was leaving, doing the honorable thing by removing himself from her life, giving her space to move forward with James without complications. Why then did it feel so wrong? "Before I go," Alexander continued, reaching into his jacket, "I wanted to give you something." He placed a small wooden box on her desk. Curious, Isabella opened it to find an architectural compass, an antique brass instrument with intricate engravings. "It belonged to William Parsons," Alexander explained, "one of the pioneers of sustainable architecture in the early 20th century. I found it at an auction last month and thought of you immediately." Isabella lifted the compass reverently. "Alexander, this is museum quality. I can't accept it. Please." His voice was soft but insistent. "Consider a professional gift from one colleague to another, a token of my admiration for your work." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. Alexander had always known exactly what would move her, not jewels or luxuries, but something connected to her passion, something with history and meaning. "Thank you," she said finally, carefully returning the compass to its box. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words and missed opportunities. "I should go," Alexander said eventually. "Let you get back to work." As he retrieved his coat, Isabella found herself unwilling to let him leave. Not like this, not with so much left unsaid. "Why did you really come tonight, Alexander?" she asked. He paused, his back to her. "To say goodbye, I suppose." "Is that all?" He turned slowly to face her, vulnerability evident in his expression. "No. I came to tell you that loving you was the best thing I ever did, and losing you was my greatest regret. That these past weeks working with you showed me exactly what I threw away with both hands." His voice grew hoarse. "I came to say that I hope you find all the happiness you deserve with James or whoever you choose, because you taught me what real love looks like, even if I was too foolish to recognize it then." Isabella felt tears spill down her cheeks. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You can't say those things and then just leave." "What would you have me do?" Alexander asked gently. "Stay and complicate your life? Fight for you when you've built something good with someone else?" The old Alexander would have done that, pursued what he wanted regardless of the consequences. I'm trying to be better than that man. The truth of his words struck her. He was finally putting her needs above his desires, the very thing she had begged for during their marriage. What if I don't know what I want anymore? She admitted, voicing the confusion that had plagued her for weeks. Alexander's expression softened. Then take time to figure it out. I'll be in Costa Rica either way. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. Isabella, I didn't come here expecting anything. I just couldn't leave without telling you the truth, that you changed me, that knowing you made me better, even if it happened too late for us. The sincerity in his eyes undid her final defenses. Without thinking, Isabella stepped forward and kissed him, a gentle, questioning touch that quickly deepened as Alexander responded with 5 years of pent-up longing. For a breathless moment, the years between them vanished. They were simply Alexander and Isabella again, two souls who had once promised forever to each other. When they finally broke apart, reality came crashing back. Isabella stepped back, conflicted emotions warring within her. I shouldn't have done that, she said, touching her lips. James doesn't deserve this. Alexander nodded, equally shaken. You're right. That was my fault. It wasn't just you, she admitted. I've been confused ever since you came back into my life. Seeing how you've changed, watching you prioritize others over yourself. It's everything I once hoped for. But it came too late, he finished for her, resignation in his voice. Isabella closed her eyes, gathering her courage. I need time, Alexander. Time to sort through what I'm feeling, to be fair to James and to myself. I understand. He picked up his coat. My flight leaves next Thursday. If you want to talk before then, about anything, I'll be at the penthouse. As he turned to go, Isabella felt a sudden panic at the thought of him walking out of her life again. Alexander, wait. He paused, hope flickering across his features. The night of the gala, she began hesitantly. You noticed I still wear the bracelet you gave me for our first anniversary. Alexander nodded. The sapphire one. I never took it off, she confessed. Not even during the divorce. James asked about it once, and I told him it was a gift from my mother. Why did you keep wearing it? Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella met his gaze directly. Because despite everything, a part of me never stopped loving you. I'm not saying that means we have a future, but I needed you to know that before you left. The admission hung between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Thank you for telling me, Alexander said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever you decide, Isabella, know that I will always love you, and this time I know what that love is worth. With that he left, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in the empty studio. Isabella sank into her chair, tears flowing freely now. The compass box had opened before her, a symbol of paths not taken and choices yet to be made. She had important decisions ahead. Conversations with James that would be painful no matter what she decided, soul-searching about what she truly wanted for her future. But for the first time in years, Isabella felt the stirring of something she had long ago surrendered. Hope that perhaps some mistakes could be unmade, and some loves deserved a second chance. 3 days later, after the most difficult conversation of her life, Isabella found herself standing outside Alexander's penthouse. James had been hurt, but not surprised by her confession. I've seen it in your eyes since he came back, he had said with sad resignation. You never looked at me the way you look at him, even when you're angry with him. The doorman recognized her immediately, greeting her with warm familiarity as he announced her arrival. The elevator ride to the top floor gave her time to gather her thoughts, to be certain of the choice she had made. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, Alexander was waiting, surprise evident on his face. Isabella. She stepped into the space that had once been her home, noting the changes he had made. Warmer colors, more books, fewer cold glass surfaces. It felt more like a home now than it ever had during their marriage. I've made my decision, she said without preamble. I ended things with James. Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm sorry. I know that couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, she agreed. He's a good man who deserves someone who loves him completely. That wasn't me. It never was, even before you came back into my life. Alexander took a hesitant step toward her. What are you saying, Isabella? She took a deep breath. I'm saying I want to try again. Not picking up where we left off. We're different people now, but starting something new with all we've learned. Hope dawned in his eyes. Are you sure? Because if this is out of obligation or guilt. It's not, she interrupted firmly. It's because in these past weeks, I've seen the man I always believed he could be. Someone who balances ambition with compassion. Someone who puts others first. Someone who isn't afraid to be vulnerable. She moved closer to him. I'm still scared, Alexander. Terrified, actually. But I'm more afraid of walking away from the second chance than I am of taking the risk. Alexander reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. I will spend every day making sure you never regret this decision, he promised. I know what matters now, Isabella. And it's not buildings or companies or fortunes. It's this, us, building something meaningful together. Costa Rica, she said suddenly. Does that offer still include a +1? Alexander's face lit up with joy. You would come with me? Isabella nodded. Monroe Design has capable leadership who can handle the community center project. And sustainable development in Costa Rica sounds exactly like the kind of work I've always wanted to do. She smiled. Besides, I think we both could use a fresh start somewhere new. Together, Alexander whispered, drawing her into his arms. Together, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. In that moment, Isabella knew they had been given a rare gift, the chance to rewrite their story with wisdom earned through loss, to build a love stronger for having been broken and mended, to create a future that honored both who they had been and who they had become. 5 years after their divorce, Alexander Steele had indeed taken back his wife, but this time they were taking back each other as equals, partners in the truest sense of the word, ready to build something neither could create alone. The Costa Rican sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as Isabella put the finishing touches on her latest design, a community education center that would serve several rural villages while maintaining harmony with the surrounding rainforest. From the veranda of their modest but beautiful home overlooking the Pacific, she could see Alexander returning from a meeting with local officials. Unlike the power suits of his New York days, he now wore simple linen shirts and looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The past 6 months had transformed them both. Alexander had channeled his business acumen into helping sustainable enterprises secure funding and scale their operations, while Isabella's designs were revolutionizing how development could occur without environmental exploitation. Together, they had established the Steele Monroe Foundation, which provided grants for eco-friendly building projects in underserved communities worldwide. Their first major success had been the Brooklyn Community Center, which had opened last month to enthusiastic reception from residents. How was your meeting? Isabella called as Alexander climbed the steps to the veranda. Productive, he replied, leaning down to kiss her. The government approved our proposal for the reforestation initiative. We can start hiring local workers next week. Isabella beamed. That's wonderful. We should celebrate. I thought the same thing, Alexander agreed, pulling an envelope from his pocket, which is why I picked up these from town today. Curious, Isabella opened the envelope to find 2 airline tickets to New York, dated for their first anniversary of their reconciliation, not their original wedding. I thought we could check on the community center, see how everything is functioning in person, Alexander explained. Maya sends updates, but it's not the same as seeing ourselves. Isabella smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. I'd like that. I miss it sometimes. Just sometimes? He teased, settling into the chair beside her. Only occasionally, she assured him, reaching for his hand. This life we're building here, it's everything I never knew I needed. Alexander brought her hand to his lips. I think back to that night at the gala, seeing you after 5 years apart. What if I hadn't gone? What if you hadn't been the speaker? I don't believe it was coincidence, Isabella said softly. I think we were always meant to find our way back to each other. We just needed to become the right people first. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. The funny thing is, losing you made me become the man who deserved you. I needed that wake-up call, painful as it was. And I needed to find my own strength, Isabella added, to build something meaningful on my own before I could truly be your partner. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset give way to early stars. This quiet companionship was something neither had fully appreciated during their first marriage. The peace of simply being together, no distractions, no urgent business calls. Just two people who had traversed a difficult path to find each other again. I have news, by the way, Isabella said after a while, a slight tremor in her voice. Alexander turned to her, eyebrow raised in question. I wasn't going to say anything yet. Want to be absolutely sure, she continued, suddenly nervous. But yesterday at my checkup in San Jose, the doctor confirmed it. Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Isabella, are you saying? She nodded, eyes shining with tears. I'm pregnant, due in late fall. For a moment, Alexander seemed frozen in astonishment. Then he was on his knees beside her chair, gathering her into his arms with gentleness that belied his overwhelming emotion. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, pulling back to see his face. Alexander laughed, tears streaming down his cheeks unashamedly. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm everything. Terrified, elated, grateful beyond words. He placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. 5 years ago, I would have worried about how a child would impact my schedule, my business commitments. Now, all I can think is how incredibly fortunate we are to have this chance, to create a family together, to raise a child in love and balance. Isabella covered his hand with her own. That's how I knew we were ready. Because this time, we're both putting what matters first. Alexander helped her to her feet, cradling her face as if she were the most precious treasure he had ever beheld. I love you, Isabella Steele, more than I ever believed possible. And I love you, she whispered back, enough to give you a second chance, enough to believe in us again. As night fell over their mountainside home, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, a path of separation that had ultimately led to a deeper, truer connection. Their story wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated, and marked by mistakes. But perhaps that was what made their love so powerful in the end. It had been tested, broken, and reforged into something unbreakable. The billionaire CEO had indeed taken back his wife after 5 years' divorce. But in truth, they had taken back each other, creating something far more valuable than either had ever possessed alone. A love made stronger by second chances, a future brightened by shared purpose, and the promise of family built on lessons hard won but never forgotten.